Okay, so here's another compound that I would love to talk about here. Beta-hydroxybutyrate, ketone bodies. Okay.
Right.
In the world of ketogenic diets, which have become very, very popular, arguably the most popular dietary trend the world's ever seen, the ketogenic world loves to talk about the improvement in brain function that occurs as a result of going into ketosis. So you eat a high-fat diet, your liver converts those saturated fatty acid molecules into ketone bodies. One of those ketone bodies is beta-hydroxybutyrate that then has effects in you. It becomes the predominant fuel for your brain. So what the ketogenic world says is that not only is beta-hydroxybutyrate a ketone body that then becomes the predominant fuel in ketosis, but it's actually better for your brain than glucose. And your brain derives more benefits from running off of BHB than it does from glucose. Is any of this true based off of what you guys know?
So first of all, we always say as scientists, we are open to any data. And so we don't, we're saying, show us the data and we'll be fine. I mean, show us the data. And so far there has never, ever been any study longer than 6 months, not any valid study longer than 6 months that shows benefit. Now, 6 months in cognitive studies is meaningless. I can smile at you 5 minutes and in 6 months, you'll still, you'll feel better. Maybe. I mean, I hope that I have that effect on you, Cyrus.
You're a very attractive man, so yes.
So 6 months means nothing. Show me long-term, because 6 months I can give you Adderall and you're going to feel great. In fact, you'll do great on tests. But would you put your kids on Adderall for the rest of all the kids, even without ADD? Would you put all kids in America on Adderall for the rest of their life? I mean, that little bit of concept should actually shake people. Short-term benefit does not mean anything long-term. The second thing is because of the fact that it actually gets to the brain quicker, easier. I mean, I'm reading. I just for today's talk, I wanted to actually recite how glucose gets into the cell. This carbohydrate molecule gets broken down, and then in the stomach gets broken down, then gets absorbed. Then it has to get attached to a receptor in the blood-brain barrier. Then it gets to the CSF. Then it gets to the vessels. Then it gets to the cell, and then it has to be the right amount of glucose. If it's too many, the receptor is internalized. If it's not the right amount, it's internalized. So the right amount of glucose. Then it binds to the receptor. It's a 2-beta, 2-alpha. And it binds to one of them, and then the kinase starts. And I wanted to read out all the rest of the chemical processes, and there's no way I can memorize all of them. I have a page and a half of chemical processes that this poor molecule has to go through in order for the cell to use it appropriately. There's a reason for that. All those processes are semi-processes for other things. There was a reason for all this complexity of behavior, complexity of metabolism to be there. And then you have this molecule, small 2 to 3 carbon molecule that goes right through the blood-brain barrier, right through the cell, gets into the mitochondria, and yes, activates it. You know what else can do that? Cocaine. Not in that mechanism, but it hypes you up. Adrenaline, Adderall. Short-term gain means nothing. It's confirmation bias. Now, if you show me evidence long-term, I'm completely open, but we're jumping ahead of ourselves. And the reason I'm a little more emotive here is because I think the damage is profound, potentially profound, because the short-term gain in itself can do damage. And we know that's true because we know that there's some inflammation that happens with this short-term quick burst of energy. I tell people, if anybody, I'm going to age myself, if anybody has driven a Pinto, Ford Pinto, yeah, so I had a Ford.
Talk about Pintos. I don't know why.
Yeah, I had a Ford Pinto. And imagine putting that on nitro fuel and people say, oh, that's good, nitro fuel. No, it's not. Nitro fuel is not good. You need an appropriate electric car. But let's say you have nitro fuel for 1 day, continuously running the engine, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, month, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. What's going to happen to that Pinto engine?
It's going to blow up.
It's going to blow up. That's what you're doing to your mitochondria. Yeah. Just because for the first four months you're running like crazy it doesn't mean that it's got long-term benefit. We know how cellular metabolism works. We know how DNA works. We know how the cell ages. We know how we shouldn't even get into AGEs and all these other aging mechanisms.
Right.
So this concept of science based on confirmation bias because they want to eat fat and short-term gain means nothing. By the way, the whole science came from our field. A small population of children with epilepsy that couldn't be controlled with 3 or 4 drugs were given this, and it created quiescence, it quieted down the seizures to some extent, and it didn't improve their life. In fact, we know what it did to their cardiovascular disease, profound damage.
Right.
But these people were in such bad shape that you just wanted to quiet. So yeah, if you acidify their CSF, they're going to quiet down, but cognitively they were lower. Long-term heart disease, much worse. But let's say even if it worked, it's like saying because chemotherapy worked for some people who had cancer, therefore we have to give everybody chemotherapy. It doesn't make sense in any way from any direction. But yet we are always open to new data, but the data has to show long-term efficacy, and the data has to show, in medicine we say, do no harm first and then do good, right? That's the first Hippocratic. Show us that long-term it does not do any harm.
And there's none.
There's none.
Despite all the noise that you're hearing about research on ketogenic diet or BHB actually being beneficial for the brain, there was one study, the longest study that we have, like Dean said, for brain health was 12 weeks. It was an elderly population who had dementia, and they actually went through this whole stage of ketogenic diet and being in ketosis. By the way, most of them couldn't reach ketosis because it was so hard. So, and then there was some improvement, probably because of some biases that were introduced. But then, most of them actually went back to their cognitive decline state right after that study was completed. And a high percentage of them actually got worse. Obviously, because, when you're on a high-fat diet, you actually cause inflammation and oxidative stress at the cellular level. That's it. The other small studies are feasibility studies. They actually didn't take data of how they did cognitively. They just wanted to know whether people could do it or not. We don't have any long-term data, and it's so wrong for people to actually start talking about ketogenic diet for the brain, given that there is no solid data to support it.
And it has taken America by storm. In fact, every airport that we go to, we see 1 or 2 magazines with ketogenic diet on its cover.
Always.
Even if it's true, we don't have the data yet for it to be so prevalent, so ubiquitous everywhere.
And even in some of the studies, if it has shown minimal response, it's because essentially the brain has gotten to a point where it can't use glucose as fuel. It's so damaged that it's impossible for the normal processes to move forward. So, ketones serve as fuel for a very short period of time in that damaged environment. But I always tell my patients, do you want damage control lifestyle instead of health promotion? Why would you put yourself in a situation where, you're creating a model for damage control? We used to go in ketosis when we were starving for the brain to survive. That kind of model can't be good long-term at all.
So I just had a huge epiphany as you just explained that last point, because my next question to you was going to be about why many people who do adopt a ketogenic diet will anecdotally claim that their brain function has improved. I have less brain fog. I can think more clearly. My memory is better. I can sleep for a longer period of time. You hear this over and over and over again. And so I think it could result from a number of things. Number one, either the ketone bodies that have become the predominant fuel for your brain are actually more metabolically favorable than glucose, number one. Or, like you were just saying, your brain has become incapable of using glucose as a fuel, or its ability to use glucose as a fuel has gone down dramatically over time. And thereby switching over to ketone bodies in the short term, you actually experience improved cognitive health. So is that actually what's happening in a lot of people who do experience improved cognition as a result of adopting a ketogenic diet in the short term?
We believe.
Correct. Yes, that is the hypothesis. We believe that's what's happening. So that's the population who already have cognitive impairment or some type of dementia when they see this. But for the general population, for people like you and I in our age group who don't have cognitive impairment, the reason they actually feel good with a ketogenic diet is because we believe they already have had some metabolic dysfunction. Maybe their cholesterol was high, maybe they were pre-diabetic, maybe there was glucose dysregulation in their bodies. And ketogenic diet actually helps people lose some weight. So there is, because of the weight loss, some of that metabolic disease that they were experiencing is reversed. And maybe as a result of all of that, they feel a little better. It may not be necessarily because the ketone specifically actually acts at the brain cell level.